Hello, fellow chess enthusiasts, and welcome. My name is Rob Dianovich, and I am a national arbiter in Australia from the Geelong Chess Club. In today's video, what I'm going to do is provide you a guide in how to write algebraic chess notation. Now, you may wonder, Rob, why do I need to write chess notation, and what is that? Chess notation is a way of being able to track your moves. Why do we do it? It helps us to determine what did we do right, what did we do wrong, and how can we improve our game for the future. Not only that, it also helps us to understand how to read chess books and improve our overall knowledge. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to 1. Understand how to read and write chess notation, 2. Be able to read any chess books in the future, and 3. Learn some further tips and tricks on how you can improve your chess notation further. So thanks to chesskids.com, let's take a further look on how to understand in reading and writing chess notation.
Here is an empty chessboard. And the first important thing that you have to learn how to do before you can keep score is learn how to name all of the different squares. Each square on the chessboard has its own special name, its own kind of address where pieces can, live. And to find out the name of any square, all you have to know is what rank and what file it's on. Do you guys remember about ranks and files? It's really easy. Files are the lines that run up and down the board. So this would be the A file. How about this file? Easy, that's the D file, exactly. And we can see these letters going from left to right, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Easy, right? This would be the F file. How about this one? That's the C file. The ranks are just as easy. This is the first rank, shooting from left to right. All the way at the top is the 8th rank. And, every rank in between is easy. You just look to the left and see the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can say, aha, this is the 5th rank. So every square on the chessboard has a different chess address, and you can see them all here. Now that we know how to name the squares, we have to know how to name the pieces in notation. And guess what? That's really easy too. You just take the first letter of the piece, and that's how you name him. So what letter does the king start with? He starts with a K. So K is for king. Queen is Q. Bishop is B. And now the knight is a little bit tricky because the knight also technically starts with a K, right? K-N-I-G-H-T. So we use the letter N for knight so that it's not confused with the king. The rook is R. And the pawn is a little bit special. We actually don't use a P for pawn at all. So once again, king is K, queen is Q, knight is N, bishop is B, rook is R, and pawn is mysterious. I guess we'll find out soon. From here on forward, you need a piece of paper and a pencil. So if you don't have one handy, pause your video and go grab one and then come right back. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a question, how to write something down, and I want you to pause your video and write it yourself and then unpause and check it against the answer, okay? How would you write this move? You move your king to this square right here. Well, that square is E2, and so you would write K E2, king to E2. And notice we use capital letters for the pieces, so capital K, lowercase letter for the file, so lowercase e, and then 2. King E2. Easy. How about this move? Well, that's queen to the G4 square, so we would write Q G4. How about this move? That square is A8, and so we will write rook to A8, R A8. How about this move? Write it down. That is knight to the square called C6, and so we write capital N C6, knight C6. What about this move? That would be bishop to the square G7, and so that's B G7. And last but not least, we're going to try moving this pawn. And let's say I move the pawn here to this square. What is the name of that square? Simple, that's the E5 square. And I told you pawns are special. We don't write PE5. All we write is E5. Pawns do not need their capital P. You just write the square that it moves to. This is E5. If we move it again, we would write E4. Exactly. Here are some important special notations. Whenever you capture a piece, you write X in between the name of the piece you moved and the square. So if you captured a piece on H4 with your rook, you would write R X H4. Whenever you make a check, you put a plus at the end of the move. For example, knight E8 check would be N E8 plus. Knight E8 check. When you make a double check, you put two pluses to mean two checks at the end of the move. And when you make a checkmate, you do a number sign for checkmate.
So just coming back a step on that one, they in America they call it a number sign, but in Australia we refer to that as a hashtag. So the hashtag represents what we call a checkmate in Australia.
So let's say white played in this position, rook takes H8, making a checkmate. The way you would record that is R for rook, X because you captured something, H8, that's the square you went to, and then number sign for checkmate. RX, H8, checkmate, number sign.
Or in our case, hashtag sign.
Let's say it was black's move, and he played the move rook takes C1 and made a double check. Well, you would write that as R, because you moved your rook, X, because you captured something, C1, double check, two pluses. Okay? Here are some other important special moves that come up. When you castle on the king side, you write 0-0. When you castle on the queen side, you write 0-0-0, 3 zeros. When you promote your pawn, you write the name of the square, for example, E8, and then a capital letter for the piece that you want to transform into. So E8, Q. E8 is a queen. And you can also put an equals sign like this. E8 equals queen.
So that is more common in Australia when you're playing in tournaments, is to use the equal sign and to show what that piece represents.
You can also put the piece you turn into in parentheses like this. E8 parentheses queen. So they all mean the same thing. They just mean you went to that square with your pawn and you turned into a queen. So whichever one you like, whichever is your favorite, you can use that. So how would you write it if you pushed a pawn to the F8 square and turned into a knight? Yup, F8 equals knight, or just F8 knight, or F8 parentheses knight. Okay? If white wins the game, you write 1-0 at the end of your score sheet. If black wins, you write 0-1, and if it's a draw, you write 1/2-1/2. What would you write if white played here? You would write A3 because the pawn moved to A3. How about if the black pawn captured that pawn on A3 like this? That would be B for the B file, X, A3. See, the pawn starts here on the B file, and he captured on the A3 square, so BX A3. Notice that you use lowercase letters when you're talking about pawns. So B is lowercase. What if white played pawn to A4? You would write A4, and then black took that pawn en passant. How would you write that? You actually write that exactly the same way. You write B X A3. After all, the final position looks exactly the same. B X A3.
Now, en passant is one of those tricky moves that happens in chess. So it could happen on any side of the board, provided that, as you can see the example, it's only once a pawn reaches a certain point on the board, and when you move your pawn for the first time 2 squares forward. So if I had a pawn like in this example, where the pawn was on b4, and I push my pawn from a2 to a4, that is considered en passant. The same works for if, say, my white pawn was on d5 and black decided to move their pawn from e7 to e5. It allows me to decide if I want to take en passant, which means that my pawn would go d takes e6. But let's say if my pawn was on d5 and my opponent had their pawn on e6 and then they decided to move it to e5, you cannot take that as en passant. That is not en passant. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense to you.
Now, there's only one thing I need to tell you before you're ready to annotate an entire game correctly from start to finish, and that is how to make sure to keep things disambiguous. Ambiguous means when you're not sure which one of two different things you mean. So, for example, if I move this rook to e1, how would you write that? Well, you might think you would just write R E1 because you moved your rook to E1. But the problem is, how would you write this rook going to E1? Well, that would also be R E1. So when you were going over the game later, how could you be sure which one you meant? So what you do in this situation is you have to take a little bit of information about the rook you're moving and write that too. So if you move this rook that started on the F file to E1, you would write RF to E1 so you know that you moved the F rook. And this other rook would be RA to E1. What if both pieces that you're moving start on the same file? Like take these two knights here. There's a knight on F8 and F6. What if you move knight to D7? You couldn't write knight F to D7 because that's the F knight too. Well, in that case, you would write knight 8 because it starts on the 8th rank to D7. And if the other knight moved, you would write knight 6 to D7. Okay? So that's it.
So a lot of even seasoned players that play in tournaments do still muck this up a little bit when they write their notation around this area. But this is a really good example of what you can do in that situation.
Remember, all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil.
Generally, what you would get is a score sheet when you're playing in a tournament, or in some countries they refer to it as a notation sheet. It's more common in Australia just to call it a score sheet, but it looks like this as an example. So there you can see where you've got boxes to and space to write the details about your who your opponent is, your details, what the event is about, and also the white moves where you can record those, the black moves where you can record those, and you can see it's quite detailed, but it does come in really handy when you finish your game that you can go back and analyze it as well.
If you're going to be writing down your games at a big chess tournament, then what you really need to do is practice before you get there. When you first learn to write down your moves, it can be a little distracting because every time you write something down, you have to figure out the piece and the square and everything. So you need to practice it a couple times, and what I recommend is you just write down the first 5 moves of your game the next time you play. Then the game after that, write down the first 6 moves, or if you want to keep going, you can, and just add to it a little bit at a time. Now, one last thing. What do you do if you're keeping score and you mess up? Well, you know what? Everyone messes up, and what you do is you just leave a space on the move you messed up and just keep writing down your game. You can always ask your opponent if he can loan you his score sheet, and maybe he wrote it down correctly and you can fix it. But don't worry about it. Just leave the mistake that you made and keep going. Maybe put a little star there so you know that you messed up, and you can always figure it out later.
Chess is a wonderful game and always evolving in a way of learning new techniques and new processes. And there is just so much to learn in the game. One way to improve your chess is by reading chess books, and understanding notation will help you to do that in being able to sharpen your game even better. So, one great thing is that you can always find cheap chess books at your local secondhand bookstore, or you can buy them online, brand new, or even at chess tournaments, you may be able to purchase them at a reasonable price as well. So, a bonus tip here is if you play chess online against friends, what you'll find is that when you're making your moves, you'll find that the notation is recorded here for you. So, a bonus tip here is if you're still not sure in how to write notation, what you can do is find a friend online and play a game and look to see what are the moves that are coming up as part of the notation. Now, instead of just the computer doing it, what you can do is you can have your own little score sheet and record the moves yourself. That way, you can practice your notation in undertaking it for yourself. This will help you to improve your game. Now, you can do this through chess.com or you can do this through Chess and other type of databases. But it's a great way of being able to go through your game and then analyze it later and identify what worked well and what didn't work so well for yourself. Now, what I've shown you today is how to take algebraic notation. There is also classical notation, and it's handy to understand how to read that as well, because if you buy an older chess book, chances are it'll be in classical notation. If you want to learn more about how to read classical notation as well, put a comment down below and I'll look to create that video for the future. Also, in the description down below, I'll provide information about the Geelong Chess Club and how to get in contact if you're looking to join a club this year. Enjoy this wonderful game, my friend, and happy learning.